Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. This is the post-game podcast from Wolves Kings on Saturday night. Another impressive Timberwolves win, beating a surefire playoff team by 12 on the road. We'll talk about the offense without Karl-Anthony Towns, how great that was, the big moments that Ant had, that Jaden McDaniels had, that Rudy Gobert had, and also the Wolves' late game stingy defense that turned into explosive offense down the stretch. We'll break it all down. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Happy Monday. Happy Christmas Day, everybody. Hopefully you are having a fantastic holiday, a great weekend, and some time away from work, some time to relax, and tons of great NBA action on today. Of course, the Wolves don't play again until Tuesday night. Today is the post-game podcast. We're talking all things Wolves Kings from Saturday, kind of catching up on everything that happened. The Wolves held the Kings to 98 points, won by 12, another impressive road win against a team that had beaten them just a few weeks prior. And the Wolves are now 22-6, alone atop the West, and tied for the NBA's best record still with the Boston Celtics. I want to break down that game Saturday. Of course, no Karl-Anthony Towns. So a lot about the Wolves offense and some role players stepping up. More usage available on the offensive end with no Karl-Anthony Towns. And, Jaden McDaniels, among others, played fantastic. And also the defense down the stretch in this game. For Minnesota to do what they did after the Kings came all the way back from a 22-point deficit in the fourth quarter, I want to talk about those last few possessions of the game as well. So plenty to get to here on the show. Of course, as I said, this is the post-game podcast. So we'll do all that. We'll finish it off with individual studs and duds. First of all, though, big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. Wherever you listen to podcasts, that includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. You can get the show there. You can also follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with two B's, two E's, C-K-E-N. All right. So, man, where to start with this one? I mean, first of all, this is a team, the Kings matchup. We talked about this in the Minnesota basketball party last Wednesday. The Kings matchup scares me and Jack Borman, of course, who does our postcasts and is on the Wednesday basketball party. He's editor-in-chief at K-Nasupis. He and I were both talking about how this was a difficult matchup for Minnesota, namely due to the pace that the Kings play with, the fact they have skill inside with Sabonis, and also De'Aaron Fox is such a tough cover. And this was on the heels of, well, actually, when we talked about this Wednesday, it was right before Tyrese Maxey gave the Wolves all those problems on Wednesday. And De'Aaron Fox and Tyrese Maxey certainly have some similarities. Smaller scoring guards who play with just, are essentially a fast break every time down the floor just by themselves. And, the Wolves don't always, they defend more with length than they do with quickness. And Mike Conley isn't the Memphis Mike Conley in terms of, well, he's still a very good defender. His, lateral quickness isn't quite the same as it was, 8 years ago. And while Jaden McDaniels generally does a great job staying in front of guards, it's, he struggled with Maxey last Wednesday because who doesn't, right? When these guys are at their best, there's a reason why true top-level perimeter defenders are at a premium, because it's really tough to stop the Tyrese Maxeys and the De'Aaron Foxes of the world when they get going. And that's one of the, the main reasons why this matchup made me nervous coming in. And also, like, obviously, the way that the Wolves played against the Kings a few weeks ago, which I should say, really more the way the Kings played against the Wolves in that in-season tournament game. It was more about how lights out the Kings were from beyond the arc and how good De'Aaron Fox was than it was about anything the Wolves did drastically wrong in that game, right? But, Sacramento is a team that plays at an extreme pace. They're 10th in the league in pace. They're third in three-point attempt rate and 15th in percentage. And those things make me nervous because the Wolves, even though they do a good job at suppressing opponent three-point attempts, which we'll talk about on Tuesday's show, I want to go a little bit more in depth on that. Teams that shoot a high volume of threes, there's more variance in their performance. They play a ton of possessions. There's more variance in those teams' performances. And then you add in the speed of somebody like De'Aaron Fox. The fact that Sabonis is someone who can get opposing teams into foul trouble. The Kings are pretty middle of the pack in terms of offensive free throw rate. But the Wolves have been fouling a little bit more lately. Of course, the Sixers game just happened on Wednesday. So this matchup was a bit, it's not my favorite matchup as somebody who follows the Timberwolves. So that made me a little bit nervous coming in. As it turns out, and then also you add no Karl-Anthony Towns, and the Wolves front line is just simply thinner. And so I had some concerns. As it turns out, the Wolves had plenty of offense in this game, and they drove the Kings crazy with on the other end of the floor. So we'll start with the offense. Minnesota had a ton of paint points early. They had, I want to say 20 of their 28 points the first quarter in the paint. I don't have that right in front of me, but I believe that that's what it was. And it was just the Wolves had such a great plan for the Kings playing aggressively in pick and roll coverage. The Kings were pretty much playing everything at the level and occasionally even hedging even harder and almost playing a high wall type blitzing coverage and pick and roll. And this was like Anthony Edwards. I mean, Mike Conley always handles that type of pressure really well. But last year and obviously prior in Anthony Edwards' career, he didn't always handle that ball pressure extremely well in pick and roll game. He would kind of panic, would either try and force something himself or, throw a crazy pass to the opposite corner or whatever, like turn the ball over. And he just did a really good job of finding the open guy, whether it was, waiting that extra beat, that half beat to get the defender sucked all the way out, give himself enough of a window to fire a pass into Rudy. It was often Rudy that was rolling. Or if it was a pass to an assist, right? The pass to somebody else that can get an assist because two are playing the ball. And the Kings actually, I don't think covered that badly. Like they still had guys tagging the roller. They had guys stepping up to try and get to Gobert. And then Gobert was making the right play, right? He only had one assist in this game, but there were multiple instances where whatever big it was, Rudy or Nas typically, or Kyle Anderson, whoever was setting the screen could then turn and hit somebody else. With a pass that hopefully would lead to a bucket. The Wolves, by the way, had 31 assists on 44 made field goals in this game, which is an incredible ratio. It was really good the other night too in their win on Thursday over the Lakers. Their assist to made basket ratio or assist percentage, I guess, if you will, was really impressive in that game too. So the Wolves passing in general was really on point in this game. And credit Mike Conley, credit Anthony Edwards. Ant had 10 assists. Conley had 9. By the way, also having, I didn't talk about the starting lineup yet, but Karl-Anthony Towns not playing. So the obvious, conventional wisdom would be, Nas would be in the starting lineup. He's going to pick up a lot of those minutes. Maybe if Cat was out for an extended period of time, but in what could just be a 1-game absence or hopefully a really short-term absence, plug and play with slow-mo makes a ton of sense because Kyle Anderson he's just a really good passer, and a team that the Wolves figured was going to play aggressively to put Kyle Anderson out there and he's a more, Nas can make strong passes and make the flashy pass from time to time, and for a big, he can pass. He's nimble, right? He's got that skill set. Kyle Anderson is a much more solid, heady passer, and I would say more consistent passer in general. I know he's had some turnover issues this year overall, but he made sense to me to plug into the starting lineup. And then that way you're not asking, and if you put Nas in the starting lineup, Nas is going to try to replicate what Cat does offensively from a scoring perspective. Kyle Anderson can simply pick up the slack from a passing and distribution standpoint, and he's probably even a better passer than Karl-Anthony Towns. Certainly he's looking to pass more than Cat is, and that's not a knock on Cat. That's just the type of player Kyle Anderson is. He essentially plays point forward for this team, frequently. And then all you're doing from there is asking Jaden McDaniels to pick up some of that scoring slack and ask Ant to be even a little bit more high usage, which he has no problem doing. So sure enough, you end up with Ant with 34 points. You have Gobert with 21, and Jaden McDaniels launches 16 shots in this game, 9 3-pointers, and finishes with 20 points, and was really, really solid on both ends of the floor. Better than solid, really. So Kyle Anderson picks up the passing and the size elements of it, of Cat's absence, and then you're just asking Jaden McDaniels to do more offensively. McDaniels actually ended up playing more minutes in this game than anyone else. He had a game high 41 minutes, which we'll talk more about McDaniels later. But in terms of the starting lineup and the way the Wolves attacked offensively to start the game, that was kind of the game plan. Is like, hey, the Kings are going to be aggressive. Let's put somebody who's slow and can counteract that pace. And not literally for that reason, but that's kind of maybe an unintended benefit, or maybe it was intended. In addition to the passing chops that slow-mo brings to the game, he gets the ball in a short roll and he can just kick it to the corner or dump it down to Rudy, or maybe Kyle Anderson operates in pick and roll. Like, any of those options are available. And the Wolves in general, whether it was Ant, whether it was Conley, whether it was slow-mo, those guys all passed really well at a pick and roll game. McDaniels picked up a lot of the scoring slack, and the Wolves just kind of built on what they were doing throughout the game offensively. They're up 8 at the end of the first quarter. They're up 12 at halftime. Third quarter, the Kings put up a fight. The Wolves are actually a -1 in the third, which is the opposite of what we typically see out of the Wolves in the third quarter. And it wasn't until the fourth when Minnesota really surged forward even more and made this a 20-plus point lead. I want to talk about late fourth quarter. The Wolves built that lead, then they relinquished it. I want to talk about the end of the fourth. We'll talk key takeaways before we get into individual studs and duds. That's what we'll do next year. All right, a big thank you once again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Also, a reminder that Locked On now has the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. All right. So late fourth quarter, the Timberwolves they actually built a lead of 22 midway through the fourth. And the lead had kind of hovered around 20 for a while, and it got up to, I think, 19 at one point in the third quarter. It was back down to, what was it? It was, I think, 13 going to the fourth quarter. But the Wolves, again, they pushed it all the way up to 22 with about 7 minutes left. I'm going to get the exact. They're up 22 with 7:21 left in the game. So just over 7 minutes. And then from there, all of a sudden, the Kings go on a really quick 8-0 run, which most of it was Harrison Barnes. They go on an 8-0 run. No, I'm sorry, a 13-0 run. The Wolves kind of get a couple buckets in there, and then all of a sudden it gets back down to a 5-point game with exactly 2 minutes to play after Trey Lyles gets a dunk, or a layup, I guess. Now it's a 5-point game with 2 minutes left. Of course, the Golden One Center's rocking. Like, it's down to actual crunch time now after the Wolves were just up 22. Like, literally took just over 5 minutes for the Kings to shave 17 points from 22 down to 5. Yeah, 17 points off the Wolves lead. And then the Wolves come down. McDaniels hits a tough shot. So now it's back to 7. But then on the ensuing possession defensively, the Kings get an offensive rebound, which the Wolves did a good enough job on the glass in this game. They ended up a +2 overall. But the Kings get an offensive rebound with about a minute and a half left. Trey Lyles in the left corner tries to find, I forget who it was, on the right side. And Ant just, like, it was a bad pass by Trey Lyles, but Ant did the free safety thing where he looked up, his eyes followed, the eyes of the guy with the ball. He jumps out, grabs the pass, and gets down the court and gets a dunk in transition. Then on the other end, now it's a 9-point game with just over a minute to play. De'Aaron Fox gets McDaniels in space. McDaniels does what hardly anybody could do last year. Remember, De'Aaron Fox was pretty clearly the best clutch player of the league last season. By the way, side note, one of the reasons I thought the Kings would regress a bit this year is they were so good in close late situations, and De'Aaron Fox was ridiculously good. This team was also really healthy. Like, for all those reasons, I thought maybe we'd see some regression from the Kings. So far, I think they're pretty on pace to hit their over-under or their win total. So I could be wrong there. But anyway, at least in this game, there was some regression because De'Aaron Fox had to take on Jaden McDaniels. McDaniels gets him, or Fox gets into the paint. McDaniels actually blocks. De'Aaron Fox is so good at getting to his spots, right? He's so quick. McDaniels just beat him to the spot, blocked his shot. Kyle Anderson grabs it, pushes it up to, I think to Ant. Yeah, pushes it up to Ant, and then Ant just takes it all the way down. Euros, gets the and one, puts the Wolves up 11 with a minute to play, or actually by 12 with a minute to play, and that was it. That was all she wrote. They traded a couple three-pointers. Conley hit a dagger with 30 seconds left. But that sequence was kind of the embodiment of the Wolves' season in a sense, right? It was McDaniels hitting a shot, great team defense, Ant getting a fast break dunk, more great individual defense from Jaden McDaniels, and then Slow-Mo and Ant running the break, getting a bucket. And it hasn't always been pretty. It often is. Hasn't always been pretty. And especially some of these games that the Wolves, I don't want to say dominate, but they're in control of for most of it. And then they allow the opponent back in. And then they end up winning. It was a different sort of level of comfort, I guess, than what we saw in the Lakers game Thursday. But at times, it still kind of felt like the Wolves were like, we have this one in the bag. We can turn it on whenever we need to, which is, of course, a little bit dangerous. But it's also, I said this a lot, or I said this a bunch on Friday's show, the post-game pod from the win over the Lakers. It happens with good teams, right? And this was a good team playing a good team. And the Wolves still kind of let their foot off the gas a little bit there in the fourth quarter. And I should also say this. I actually thought the offense operated fine. There were a couple of Ant possessions where he did the thing where he just kind of pounds the rock and then launches a three. He was 3 of 12 outside the arc in this game. That's my only kind of quibble with the Wolves offense. I actually thought the process was good in the fourth quarter. Even while the Kings are making their run, the Wolves mostly got good shots. They just missed them. Conley had a 3-point shot rim out. Ant had a pull-up jumper from in 2-point range, like a right side of the floor that rimmed out. Alexander Walker, I think, missed he had a layup that just kind of rimmed out. McDaniels missed a 3-pointer that wasn't a bad shot. Like it wasn't all just Ant ISOs. It wasn't sloppy, rushed stuff in transition. It wasn't missed a bunch of missed layups. It was one missed layup, but like these were all shots that just kind of rimmed out. And the process was good. The passing was good. I didn't really have a problem with how the Wolves played in the fourth quarter, except for a couple of those Ant possessions, which really it was more the Wolves were building that lead. Like it was when they were up by 20-ish points. He had a couple of those. And then very late in the game, he had a couple of those. But throughout that, 13-0 Kings run, and they cut 17 points off the lead in 5 minutes, I actually thought the offensive process wasn't bad for the Wolves, and it was just missed shots, and that happens. And the Kings are a good team. They turned it on offensively, and then when it really mattered down the stretch in clutch time, final 2 minutes, the Wolves turned it on defensively, and that was all she wrote. And they held a Sacramento offense that is fantastic even after this game. This is still the 13th best offense in the league. They were the league's were they the best offense last year? Yeah, they were. They were number one in offensive rating last year. They were, even after this game, they're 13th in the league this year. They're 10th in pace. What did I say? Third in 3-point attempt rate, 15th in percentage. They held this team to 98 points. They held this team to, here, I'll throw up the stats real quick if you're watching on YouTube. They held this team to 98 points. They held them to 43.5% shooting from the field. And just another, another notch in the belt, if you will, for the Timberwolves this year in terms of how they played against good offenses. This isn't a top 10 offense currently, but I talked about this last week. I think the Sixers are now the only team with a top 10 offense that's beaten the Wolves. The Wolves are, if I remember correctly now, 6-1 against teams with top 10 offenses. And Sacramento, when it's all said and done this year, very likely will have a top 10 offense. And they were, again, the number one team in the league last year in terms of offensive efficiency. It's effectively the same roster. They missed De'Aaron Fox for a few games this year. They had a couple of injuries, but this is a good offensive team. Make no mistake. The Wolves held them under 44% shooting from the field. They held them to 30%, or excuse me, 24% on 3-point attempts. 8 of 33 outside the arc is 24.2%. And, they turned him over 11 times. They only allowed 8 offensive rebounds to Sacramento. And, Sacramento's not a huge offensive rebounding team, but still, to be able to limit those opportunities, free throw attempts, the Wolves lost in that category, as you can see there on your screen. They only shot 14 free throws to Sacramento's 21. But in general, the Wolves did a really good job. And to hold this offense to 98 points on 43.5% shooting and 20% from outside the arc, 24%, from outside the arc is really impressive for Minnesota. And down the stretch, I don't know what else to say about that. So some additional takeaways. I kind of talked about this already, but in the first segment, but the way that the Wolves covered for Cat's absence by ball movement, by Jaden McDaniels doing his thing, and we'll talk studs and duds. We'll talk more about these guys individually, but the Wolves offensively kind of papered over Cat's absence and did a really good job of coming up with enough points to beat a really good offensive team. Paint points, I alluded to this earlier. The Wolves did a bunch of this early. I haven't even talked that much about Rudy Gobert, and obviously he's a big part of all of this. But paint points in this game, Minnesota was a plus 14 points in the paint, 66 points in the paint for the Wolves. Not a very good defensive team, so they should dominate the paint. But good to see them do what they're supposed to do. A plus 14 in terms of points in the paint, a plus 23 in fast break points in this game, 28-5 against a team that is known for playing with pace, against a team, by the way, the Kings actually only turned it over 11 times in this game, and Minnesota made them pay. They had 16 points off 11 Kings turnovers. The Kings only had 10 points off 12 Minnesota turnovers. And again, the Wolves are a plus 23 in fast break points, a plus 14 points in the paint. And that is how you beat a team with an efficient offense on the road like that. Also, a side note related to the end of the game, the Timberwolves' length just really bothered the Kings up and down the floor throughout this game. I didn't mention this, or I should have. De'Aaron Fox I almost said Arvydas. Oh my goodness. I guess it shows my age. Arvydas Sabonis, right? De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis, neither one of them scored in the fourth quarter. Both had goose eggs in the fourth quarter of this game because of the Wolves defense, because of the Wolves length, I should say, on the perimeter. And also limited second chance opportunities was a big thing late in the game as well. But the Fox and Sabonis, the Kings' two best players to not have any points. I think Fox had 27 points coming into the fourth quarter. Sabonis had 17. And both of them were efficient for the game. It was just the Wolves didn't let them get to their spots late. And then when they did, they didn't let him get off a clean look. Like Sabonis was 7 to 12 shooting, not a single point in the fourth quarter. Fox was 10 to 23. Like, that's decently efficient for him. He was 3 of 11 on three-pointers. So he was 7 of 12 on 2-point attempts. Not a single point in the fourth quarter for De'Aaron Fox. The Wolves did a great job limiting those guys in the fourth and limiting everyone else over the course of the game. Keegan Murray was good. I mean, he's a really good player. Kevin Huerter had 2 points in 15 minutes, was a minus 19. The Wolves dominated him, especially early in the game. Harrison Barnes only 12 points in this game, and he's been good for them. Trey Lyles had 10 off the bench. Like, nobody else did anything. Like, those were your only other guys that were in double figures other than Keegan Murray and then Sabonis and Fox, who each did nothing in the fourth quarter. So that was really impressive for Minnesota there down the stretch, using their length to dominate late in this game. All right. I want to talk a little bit more about studs and duds, some of these other stats here as we close out the show today. And that's what we'll do here to close it out. All right, individual studs and duds from Wolves Kings. We talked a little bit about Rudy earlier, but I didn't talk about him enough. Rudy was phenomenal. This was probably a top 3 Rudy Timberwolves game, certainly this season, and there were only a couple last year that even would make that list of even top 10 Rudy games in a Wolves uniform. He was fantastic in this game. And Sabonis had a couple of highlights. He had a nice hook shot, a couple of dunks, the one where he hit Rudy in the face and easily could have been called for an offensive foul, but it was a nice dunk nonetheless. All right, that's nice. He had 17 on 12 shots. Well, guess what? Rudy had 21 on 13 shots, which is better. He had 17 boards. Domantas Sabonis had 10 boards. Rudy had 6 offensive rebounds. Sabonis had 1 offensive rebound. Rudy had 2 blocks. Domantas Sabonis had 0 blocks in this game. Rudy had 1 turnover. Domantas Sabonis had 3 turnovers. Rudy was a plus 27. Domantas Sabonis was a minus 17. The Wolves won by 12. Gobert dominated Sabonis in this game. He just did. I don't care that Sabonis hit a hook shot. I don't care that he had a couple of dunks. Rudy was the better player. Rudy was fantastic. What I've said this so many times, I'm just like at a loss for words. Like, you pick almost any possession. In fact, the possession that Sabonis got the dunk on, it was like 3 minutes left, maybe in the third quarter, I think. I looked at the time because I was like, I want to talk about this possession later. Because until that point, it was such a good Wolves defensive possession. I think Shake Milton was on the floor for it, but the Wolves were covering for each other. They were Xing out on the perimeter, denied multiple drives and potential shot attempts from the Kings. And then it finished with a Sabonis dunk. But everything else was right. And how many times in this game did Rudy simply deny the shot from ever occurring in the first place, or block a shot at the rim, or alter a shot at the rim? Rudy was so good and just provided that security blanket backline defense like he typically does for Minnesota. 21 on 13 shot attempts, 17 rebounds, 6 offensive rebounds, 1 assist, 1 of 2 at the line, a couple of blocks, only 1 turnover for Rudy Gobert in this game. Anthony Edwards, 34, 10, and 5, 13 of 27 shooting. If he just didn't launch so many threes, like, over the course of the game, contested, I don't know why he shot 12 threes, which, like, in general, and if you're a regular listener, you know, I talk about this all the time. Shooting more threes is almost always better. It just was weird that he did it so much in this game because he did everything else so well. 10 assists. He did turn over 5 times, and he was sloppy the other night with his passing. But, 34 on 27 shots, 10 assists, 5 boards. You take a few missed threes and some turnovers along with that. Like, I thought Ant was really good in this game. 5 of 5 at the line. Probably could have gone to the line a couple more times, which is usually the case with Anthony Edwards, but I thought he played well in this game. It was good defensively. I thought it was mostly, I haven't talked about Alexander Walker, but it was Nickeil Alexander-Walker and then mostly Jaden McDaniels that shut down Fox in the fourth quarter, but Ant was good overall. My third stud is Jaden McDaniels, 20 points on 8 of 16 shooting, 3 of 9 from outside the arc, 5 rebounds, 4 steals, 1 assist, 1 block, 0 turnovers in 41 minutes, a game high 41 minutes for Jaden McDaniels. I talked about this already, but he picked up that offensive slack that you're missing with no Karl-Anthony Towns. He was phenomenal defensively, and Ant talked about this after the game. Like, he's got to be first team all defense. He's so good. Mike Brown, Kings coach, shouted him out after the game, which, by the way, I'll get to this in a second. Mike Brown had another comment I wanted to talk about. McDaniels was great. He was awesome in this game. Not much more you can say about him. Dud wise, I don't really have any duds for this game. Like, everybody played pretty well. Nickeil Alexander-Walker didn't do anything offensively. He had not a single stat other than shooting 1 of 4, like no rebounds, no assists, no steals, no blocks, no turnovers. A pretty nondescript game, but some really strong defense for Nah. So not a whole lot to say there. There really aren't any duds. Rotation wise, the Wolves actually played 10 guys in this game. McDaniels got Jordan McLaughlin played a couple of minutes. Troy Brown Jr. played 3 minutes. I think it was only in the first half. And then Shake actually got rotation minutes in both halves. So Chris Finch is clearly, now that this team's getting healthy, and with no Karl-Anthony Towns, obviously there were a few more minutes in general, even if, guys are shifting positions slightly, shifting down the spectrum in terms of their positions, technically. That's why, there are a few more minutes available, but still playing 10 guys, trying to keep guys fresh. Chris Finch wants to play Jordan McLaughlin, and sure enough, in those 2 minutes, he had 2 assists, no turnovers, didn't register any other stats. Troy Brown played 3 first half minutes. Shake played 14 minutes overall, scored 5 points, knocked down a corner 3. Naz Reid was okay, 6 points, only played 19 minutes, which is a little bit weird in a game with no Karl-Anthony Towns. But again, Kyle Anderson was good, played 29 minutes, started, had 10, 5, and 5 for Kyle Anderson. And the Wolves just didn't need Naz to do as much in this game, weirdly enough, which I expected. And I said this, I think, on Friday, expected him to need to do more, to play fast, to play more minutes, to do what Naz does against I thought would be a really high scoring game. But as it turns out, the Wolves defense was so good, Sacramento only managed 98 points. So it's a good thing. They didn't necessarily need more offense from Naz Reid. But across the board, all 10 guys that played well. I think the rotation stuff was pretty interesting as well. So we'll keep an eye on that moving forward. It's still your typical top 7, minus Towns in this game. So, top 8 became top 7. And then those last couple of rotation spots kind of sliding back and forth between Shake and Troy Brown. And now you've got McLaughlin in the mix. And I think the right play is trying to get them all run. Every now and again, each of them could see a DNP-CD, but you don't want to stack those, right? You don't want Brown or McLaughlin or Milton to see 2, 3 of those in a row. You want to find them some minutes here and there and keep them fresh. And I think Finch has done a really good job of doing that. Well, this team is still just picking up W's nearly every time out. Peeking ahead. So, actually, real quick, I want to throw the stats back up if you're watching on YouTube. I talked about the field goal percentage. The Wolves made a couple more threes in the same number of attempts as Sacramento. Sacramento's 24% from deep. The Wolves were 30. Minnesota was a -1 in the turnover category, but again, +3 in rebounds, +12 in terms of points in the paint, and a +23 in fast break points in this game. -4 at the free throw line. But again, if you win, they were a +6 in terms of points outside the arc. They were a -4 at the line. So if you win that differential, you're going to be in a good place, especially if you stack those points to the paint and fast break points as well. So really strong in those categories for Minnesota. Mike Brown, this is a tease ahead to Tuesday's show. Mike Brown talked post-game, the Kings head coach, about how impressed he was with the Wolves defense and how difficult it was for Sacramento to get off shots. And he said, even if you're shooting open threes, they speed you up just enough. I'm paraphrasing, of course. They speed you up enough because you're worried about their length. And even though they're very rarely going to actually block a three-point attempt, you know that they're there and that they're long and that they're going to, they're going to hurry you. I've talked about this before on the show this year. The Wolves are doing a really good job at limiting corner three-point attempts, limiting three-point attempts in general, limiting rim attempts, and when their opponents do shoot at the rim, they don't shoot it well at the rim. The Wolves' shot profile is extremely strong, and this was a really good example of a game where the Wolves took a good offensive team and said, hey, you're not going to score as much as us in the paint, and you're not going to score as well as us from outside the arc, and we're going to win this game. And that's exactly what happened. The Wolves' defensive shot profile is so strong, it doesn't matter really who they play against, unless it's apparently Joel Embiid. The one blind spot the Wolves have, and I know that technically they're doing okay in terms of limiting free throw attempts, but they're so good everywhere else that I would argue that they're defending without fouling is still an area that if they improved even a little bit in, this would be like potentially a historically great defense. Like we're only a third of the way through the season, not even, I don't think quite, or maybe actually might be exactly a third of the way, somewhere like something like that. I think we are exactly a third of the way, pretty close. Like there's still a chance for this defense to get better, and it's defending without fouling. Like again, in this game, they allowed 21 free throw attempts. They only got 14 themselves. Like that's fine if you win points of the paint and win the 3-point battle. But that is an area they could improve. Other than that, this defense is so good. And I want to talk basically what that Mike Brown quote was alluding to. I want to break that down a bit more on Tuesday's show. I want to get into the Wolves defensive shot profile. It's been a couple of weeks since we've really dug into that and really kind of play that out a bit further. So that'll be Tuesday's show. We're still doing 5 shows this week. Just like we always do, even though we're in the midst of the holidays, we'll do 5 shows. I don't think we'll have a basketball party Wednesday, so we'll be short there, but we should have postcasts and everything all week long. The Wolves next take on the Thunder tomorrow night, Tuesday night at Oklahoma City. And I'll briefly preview that matchup. We'll talk about the last time the Wolves took on the Thunder a few weeks ago here. That'll be, the end of the show on Tuesday. So we'll spend most of the show talking about the defense, digging into the numbers, and then we'll get into the Wolves Thunder matchup. So that'll be Tuesday's show. Of course, Wednesday will be the post-game pod from Tuesday, and then we'll get into the rest of the week from there. So that's all we have for you today. A big thank you once again for watching. A big thank you for listening to Locked On Wolves, for making us your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, C-K-E-N. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.